Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is Libby Mucciaroni, Associate Director of Education, Technology, and Member Engagement at the Organic Trade Association. I'm pleased to welcome you as the Organic Center presents Small Changes, Big Outcomes, the Impact of Organic Dairy on Reducing Synthetic Chemical Use. A couple of housekeeping items before we start the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded. Our panelists will providing to all of you, a number of helpful links, as well as some companion documents throughout this presentation today. You can download those resources in the handout section and in the chat, and then we will also send all of that information out to you over email. In the next 2 business days, all of the registrants for today's webinar will receive a follow-up email, as I just mentioned. It'll also include the slides from the presentation today and a registration link to view today's recording on demand. During registration, we did ask if you had any questions for our presenters. With over 100 registrants, we are so thankful for such a diverse and engaged audience today. Your questions have been taken into account for the panelists' presentations and in preparation for our Q&A session. For any questions or comments that you may have during our discussion today, please share them with us in the questions pane on the platform. Our presenters will respond to your questions as time permits during our Q&A discussion. And for any questions not addressed today, we will follow up within the next week. And finally, if you happen to have any technical issues during the presentation, please notify us through the chat pane, or you can email me directly for assistance. The Organic Center is a nonprofit research and education organization based out of Washington, D.C. They work to conduct and convene credible, evidence-based science on the environmental and health effects of organic food and farming and communicate the findings to the public. The Organic Center's work is supported by companies and individuals who desire a sustainable and secure food system that promotes the health of humans and the environment. The Organic Trade Association is a membership-based organization for the organic industry. We ensure that all parts of the organic value chain have a strong voice in government and in our communities. We bring farmers, processors, distributors, retailers, and others together to promote and protect the growing organic sector. OTA represents its members to government on sector needs, market development and promotion, and strong organic standards and regulations. Members also receive the latest information and quick answers on organic regulations and standards in the United States and around the world. Today's webinar, we have a fantastic group of panelists joining us today. We are really excited to have our host for today is Dr. Jessica Shade. She is the Director of Science Programs at the Organic Center. She's joined by Judy Shills, Founder and Executive Director of Turning Green and Conscious Kitchen, based in Marin County, California, and Megan DeBates, Vice President of Government Affairs at the Organic Trade Association. We're also joined by brand ambassadors from Organic Valley and Stonyfield Organic, who will join us for the Q&A later in the presentation, and whose partnerships helped fund this research. Thanks to both Britt Lundgren and Josh Fairfield for attending today and for the support of their organizations and the creation of the Avoidance Calculator. Finally, one additional note, today's webinar will include a brief video just shortly. If you are dialed into the webinar and you are not using computer audio, the audio may not play in that section, but we will return back to audio after the completion of that video. You'll be able to see it though if you're on the computer. We will share that video with all attendees in the recorded version of this webinar when we circulate the video. Thank you for your understanding and patience with that. We're thrilled to have all of you in attendance today. And with that, I'm going to hand the reins over to Jessica to start our presentations. Jessica?
All right. Thank you so much, Libby. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. We're going to be talking about all the synthetic chemicals that can be avoided by choosing organic dairy and how that plugs into school lunches. So what are the policy leverage points for getting more organic into schools, and also an example of how it's been done on a local scale. But I'm going to start with a short explanation of what organic dairy is, because there's a lot of misconception out there about what it means to be organic in terms of things like milk and yogurt and other dairy. So there's some really unique regulations that organic livestock farmers have to follow, but the main differences are related to what the animal eats, what they spend, where they spend their time, and then how they're treated when or if they get sick. So organic cows have to be grazed throughout the entire grazing season. The pasture that they're grazed on has to be organic, so it can't be sprayed with toxic synthetic pesticides or fertilizer. And even the feed for the cows outside of pasture has to be completely organic, which means no growth promoters, no antibiotics, no GMO ingredients, no slaughter byproducts. Organic farmers also have to take a lot into account when it comes to the animal's living conditions. So the animal's stage of life, the climate, the environment, all need to be taken into account when the farmer plans for their year-round access to the outdoors, because they need to also have access to things like shade, shelter, exercise areas, fresh air, clean water, direct sunlight. Organic farms also focus on preventative healthcare practices to reduce illness. And if those fail, then the organic farmers can use some restricted medicines, but antibiotics and most synthetic chemicals are always prohibited. And finally, organic farmers have to make sure that they're supporting the environment around the farm. They do things like recycle manure into crop and pasture production to help avoid nutrient runoff, and increase carbon storage in their fields. They also use beneficial farming practices like crop rotations and cover crops to maintain soil fertility and help protect soil and water quality. So this is kind of a summary of what organic dairy means, just to set the stage. So I'll give you just the bullet points are no antibiotics, no synthetic growth hormones, no GMOs, no pesticides. The health and natural behavior of animals are prioritized. All livestock feed has to be 100% organically produced. Cows are pasture raised and grazed throughout the grazing season. Organic dairy farmers use holistic preventative healthcare practices, and they use practices that protect the environment. So we have a great lineup of speakers today, but we're going to start at the beginning with the farmers. We're lucky enough to have a video of one of Stonyfield's organic dairy farmers who's going to share a little bit about their story and what it's like to farm organically. So Libby, I'll let you cue that up.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Miller-Goodrich here at Mollybrook Farm in Cabot, Vermont.
And I'm Miles Goodrich. I've been here my whole life, working on the farm since I was probably 7 or 8. I'm the 7th generation. It started in 1835.
We were married actually up on the hill here. I knew when I fell in love with a dairy farmer, my destiny was going to at some point be dairy farming. But all the fresh air blowing on your face and being outside and seeing so many things that I would never see in an office, and working with such a great herd of Jersey cows, it's so rewarding. They've earned a lot of awards over the years. Miles' parents were inducted into the Dairy Shrine.
It's 7 days a week. I think I had a day off 14 years ago, but...
The night we got married, you had a night off.
So we see cows more than we see people. We wake up about 4:30. I have a cup of coffee.
He's doing that. I set up the barn. I set up the milking parlor.
We start milking by 5.
We milk them in a step-up milking parlor where we're touching them and we're cleaning them.
Yeah, you know each cow. So we just put the milkers onto the cow and the milk goes through the pipeline right to the tank directly.
They're well taken care of. We work with a nutritionist that helps us give them the best food that we can. They have the best life they can have, and that's comforting.
Since the farm began in 1835, it's been all jerseys, and they've been registered since 1917.
And they all have names, and some have nicknames, and some names are perfect. Like Pretty is the prettiest cow, and her daughter Princess is beautiful too. Also important is that we keep our size so that our land will comfortably support our animals. We average 2 acres per cow, which is very good. We're not overgrazing our land, and it's important. Before we transitioned to organic, Miles had decided we didn't want chemicals or herbicides in the fields. I mean, it just wasn't healthy. And organic is just smart. It's wholesome, it's nutritious. So much goes behind that. And that's what we want for our land also. And when our grandchildren come down, watching them, enjoy the animals, watching them learn, there's so much you can learn on a dairy farm that you're not even realizing. I like seeing them appreciate it. If Stonyfield hadn't taken our milk and worked with us, I mean, the truth is the farm wouldn't be here for its 200th birthday. From that very first call that we made when Stonyfield enthusiastically welcomed us to their family, it's been nonstop. Stonyfield is always reaching out, and that's what's important to us being a small dairy. For us, organic is definitely the way forward, and we believe in this organic movement. So the work they do to further promote that helps us all, because our carbon footprint is something that we're thinking about. We're thinking about the future of it for our grandchildren. We want our land to be better for the next generation.
All right. So it's always good to get a snapshot of what's going on in the field. I feel like that really helps me connect me to what I'm doing when it comes to the science behind organic. So now we're going to get into the chemicals that are avoided by choosing organic dairy. And I'll also share a new tool that we made for estimating the big picture of organic milk products impacts, as well as what we could achieve if there were more dairy that were produced organically. And the reason that we made this tool is because when people choose organic at the grocery store, it's easy to feel like each gallon of milk or cup of organic yogurt that you purchase is only a drop in the bucket when it comes to making a stand against dangerous chemical use. But when you take each of those organic choices and add them up, the impact is really big. So the Organic Center developed a calculator to look at the magnitude of organic dairy purchasing across the country to show you that all of those drops add up to really big impacts. So if you go to the next slide, this is at the bottom here, this is the website address, so you can explore the calculator on your own. But using it's really simple. You just click on a button to see how many chemicals are already avoided each year by in the US from organic milk production, or to see how many chemicals would be avoided each year if the United States switched to all organic dairy products. We also have space for industry partners to put in how much milk they produce or purchase so that they can see their current impact or what their impact would be if they switched to organic. So on the next slide, we've got a great example of how this has been used by industry members. So in this case, it's Organic Valley's impact report, which you can check out here. Here's the link. They also have a great video at that link describing some of the reasons behind the sustainability that you see in Organic Valley Dairy. So this is kind of an example of how this calculator is getting used by industry. On the next slide, I like to share the numbers from current US organic production because it's really encouraging and shows how every time we choose organic, it's actually adding up to big impacts. So each year, almost 600 million gallons of milk are produced organically, and that means over 160 million pounds of fertilizer that aren't spread on the soil, or 30 Olympic swimming pools full of fertilizer. It's 2.8 million pounds of pesticides that aren't sprayed on crops, or 11,000 bathtubs full of pesticides. It's over 200,000 ounces of antibiotics that don't get used, and 3.7 million drug treatments that are avoided. So it's really a lot. And on the next slide, you can just imagine what those numbers would look like if all the milk that's produced in the United States were organic. So there are 26 billion gallons of milk produced each year. So that's over 1,000 swimming pools full of fertilizer, more than 20 Olympic swimming pools full of pesticides, 9 million ounces of antibiotics, and 163 million drug treatments. Those numbers are staggering. And this is how many chemicals that we're using each year on conventional dairy production that we could keep out of the food system with organic dairy. Even if we could just get organic milk into school lunches, the impact would be incredible. We're talking 2,500 bathtubs full of fertilizer, 41 bathtubs full of pesticides, and almost 14,000 drug treatments. So we'll talk more about organic dairy in school lunches in a little bit, but just keep the extent of those numbers in mind, because we're not talking small potatoes here. So on the next slide, you can see what are these chemicals that get used in conventional dairy. So basically, there are three big categories of synthetic chemicals that are used along the production chain in conventional dairy. You've got fertilizers, pesticides, and drugs. So synthetic fertilizers are manufactured nutrients that are typically sourced from petrochemical products. There are a bunch of micronutrients that get included, but the three main building blocks of macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And in dairy, fertilizer is mostly used in the production of feeds like corn and soy because it can increase yield. But it also takes a really heavy toll on the environment because it's also linked to pollution of our waterways, biodiversity loss, soil degradation, and climate change. Synthetic pesticides are chemicals that are used for getting rid of pests. So the most common categories of pesticides are insecticides, which are used for killing insects, herbicides, which are used for killing plants, fungicides, used for killing fungus, rodenticides, used for killing rodents. And in conventional dairy, pesticides are used pretty frequently in the production, transportation, and storage of feed. They also have some serious environmental consequences like biodiversity loss, pollinator population collapse, soil health decline, water contamination, just to name a few. When pesticides are used in the production of cattle feed, their residues are consumed by the cows, and they can also be excreted into milk, which leads to pesticide residues in the conventional dairy that we eat or drink. And then finally, drug use in conventional dairy production is also really common. Dairy cattle get treated with antiseptics, bactericides, fungicides, antibiotics, steroid, anabolic growth promoters, peptide production enhancers, antiparasitic drugs, reproductive aids. It's a long list. And some of those drugs can have dangerous impacts on human health, like the proliferation of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. There's also a risk for drug transfer into milk, which means drug residues at the grocery store level in conventional dairy. So if you go to the next slide, before I hand over the reins to our next speaker, first I'm going to start with this study that we collaborated on with Emory University a couple of years ago, because one of the questions that I always get is, okay, these chemicals get used in conventional dairy production, but are they actually in the milk that my family drinks? And this research shows some pretty clear results. Conventional milk has high rates of pesticide and antibiotic residues, but organic does not. So we tested conventional and organic milk from store shelves across the United States and found that a majority of conventional milk samples tested positive for residues of antibiotics and currently used controversial pesticides. And 2 of the antibiotics that we found in conventional dairy have been entirely banned from dairy production in the US. So they shouldn't have been in any of the milk samples. We also found a sample of milk with amoxicillin, which is a kind of antibiotic level that exceeded the FDA allowable limits. When it came to pesticides, over 60% of conventional samples had currently used pesticide residues in them, but there were none in the organic samples. And then we also looked at growth hormones and found that levels in conventional milk were up to 20 times higher than in organic. So the chemicals that are getting used in conventional dairy don't just stop at the environmental side of things. They're actually transferring into the milk that we drink. But the good news is that all you have to do to avoid those chemicals is choose organic. So those are kind of some of the scientific reasons why it's important to choose organic dairy. But I'm going to pass the stage to Judy, who can talk about her work actually getting organic into school lunches, because that's something that's really important when it comes to the application of these scientific principles. So Judy, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, Jess. And I guess when you hear the numbers that Jess has been talking about, pesticides, antibiotics, drugs used in conventional dairy products, one would have thought that organic would have been the way for schools, particularly because 16 ounces of milk is mandated by the USDA daily if they're going to reimburse schools for the food that they're purchasing. So I want to take you on a little journey of the Conscious Kitchen and just share my thoughts and also, talk a little bit about the whole milk situation. So 7 years ago, I embarked on the mission of my lifetime called the Conscious Kitchen. And basically our commitment was to serve our most vulnerable children the healthiest food that we could find. We began at an elementary school in Marin City, California, Northern California, a community where 95% of the children live below the poverty line and qualify for government subsidized school meals. Fresh, local, organic were our guiding principles with an underscore under organic. Our organic farmers became the backbone of our program, supporting us to transform dining halls into hubs for health, food literacy, community engagement, and probably most of all, love. And teachers and students share freshly baked, locally sourced, organic whole grain, delicious bread, and all sorts of other things sitting around the table together. And we realized that we can co-create the dream when it comes to school food programs. I know it's possible, and so do a growing number of Conscious Kitchen partners and allies like the Organic Center. And maybe at the end of today, you will too. So we start with, what does the Conscious Kitchen do? We address food equity, education, and access by really shifting the way that we're looking at school food service, cultivating a local ecological food system, buying locally, building nutrition literacy into school meals, making garden and nutrition part of our day, and really basing everything we do around 5 words: fresh, local, organic, seasonal, nutritious. And that's how we test what's coming in and out of the food that we're feeding to the kids. Probably one of the most important things, especially as we look at things like a pandemic, is that school kitchens that are able to cook food become hubs for community resilience while nourishing the minds and bodies of the next generation. So for us, at a time when we need to center equity and access to healthy food, we're working harder than ever to allow these kitchens to exist and to be hubs for change. In fact, we were able to serve thousands of meals from our 3 Conscious Kitchens in Marin County during the first 6 months of the pandemic to feed, once again, the most vulnerable in our county, fresh, hot, organic meals daily, truly a hub for resilience. Healthy school food builds a strong foundation to be able to support our future leaders to be mentally and physically healthy. But the industrial food system, much like what you just heard from Jess, threatens the well-being of our kids. Healthy eating patterns are the most powerful tool we have to prevent the onset of disease. So as you're looking at this list, our children are facing a very uncertain future. Diet-related chronic illness in children is on the rise, and many children are suffering from diseases like this list, many of which until very recently were only seen in middle-aged adults. There's more than enough data and evidence that our conventional diets are hurting us, our children, our health, our environment, and our future. So we believe that school food has the power to change the future as a massive lever for climate change, public health, the environment, with over 56 million students eating daily across the nation. Healthier bodies equal healthier minds and happier kids. And we know this self-sustaining model works. For 9 years, schools in Marin County have been self-sufficient and 100% organic. The impact of organic food. If we think about the science, it's clear, and we just heard it underscored by a scientist, pesticides are bad for our health. We know the exposure is associated with decreased cognitive function, including IQ loss, and children are most vulnerable because of their growing organs and small size. So once again, our guiding principles inform all of our decision-making. The one in the middle is the one that really guides us most. And we refer to these 5 criteria as FLOSSN. And organic allows us to support public health, the soil, farm workers, and businesses with aligned values. Conscious Kitchen's strategy basically is a framework to build demonstration models and gather the related data and research to catalyze a groundswell to work collaboratively together towards comprehensive public policy solutions that will allow such a framework to scale and sustain itself. An example is the pilot that we're currently doing with the West Contra Costa Unified School District, once again in Northern California, adjacent to the county where we're based, Marin County. It started in November of 2020 in the face of school closures during the pandemic. Conscious Kitchen and West Contra Costa Unified School District joined forces with the goal of transitioning the district away from the prepackaged individual meals that were in the boxes every week to fresh whole ingredients, so families had food to cook nourishing meals when they really couldn't go out to purchase their own food. We started by switching the produce that was in these boxes every week, which was 10 pounds, and we transitioned that to organic. And then I asked the question, could we, the Conscious Kitchen, curate all these boxes and transition every single ingredient to organic? And the answer from Barbara Jellison, who's off to the left in a picture, food service director, was yes, do whatever you can to bring healthier food to our kids. So here we were looking at 23,000 boxes of food. Each one had enough whole food to serve 28 meals a week to each child that received it, which was a massive amount of food. Produce, grain, beef, chicken, eggs, pasta, dairy, everything. Half a gallon of milk went into every box. And basically, we had to build a supply chain that never existed where we lived. So you can take a look pretty quickly here at a little hand-drawn journey of the Conscious Kitchen. From November 5th to March 4th, we transitioned the entire box to 100% USDA certified organic, and basically never looked back. We had about 40 plus vendors, both local growers and ranchers to packaged good companies that could provide all of the items that we needed in order for people to create meals. And this is basically the impact of the purchases that we were able to make over the 8+ months. Large-scale institutional orders allowed small businesses challenged by the pandemic to thrive. Direct local supply chain allows for cost-effective purchasing for districts. Food is sourced from a closer geographic area to reduce emissions, transportation, and resources. So really addressing so many of the benefits that we need to really think about these days: climate change, soil that's degraded, all the things that we need to bring back resiliency to every aspect of our life. And that brings me to milk. So here's a picture of our Conscious Kitchen ambassadors. And they have served Straus milk in our kitchen since 2013. Straus is a local organic dairy that we love. Basically, it's an easy switch. The organic dairies where we live and where many of us live is very readily available. And if there's demand for it, the dairies are able to elevate their production. And as I said at the beginning, 16 ounces of milk is mandated daily by the USDA for schools that are serving children, mainly in underserved communities that are being reimbursed. They are mandated to serve 1% conventional milk that is laden with pesticides, hormones, antibiotics, and drugs, as Jess just shared with us. And basically, over the 8 months of the program, here's what we learned. We learned that in November, the orange bar on the left was everything was organic or conventional, and that by August, everything was organic. So in a very short period of time, in one school district of 30,000 children and 52 schools, we were able to transform a whole supply chain. So now what are we doing? So organic lunch is now being served. Schools opened last week, and we are back to school. And basically, we're taking a supply chain that is has never been organic at all, and we're trying to transition it to as close to 100% organic as we can, which is probably not going to happen in a day. But where we've started is with milk, with produce, and with some other goods, because if you're drinking 16 ounces of milk a day, and if you're mandated 12 ounces of fruit a day, if we begin with those things, we're covering a lot of the offerings that are bringing lots of pesticides and herbicides into the lives of our kids. So here's how we're approaching the transformation of school food systems. We have a chef in the kitchen supporting the new menus. We have a supply chain that is close to home and not hampered by all the challenges and the disruptions that we're feeling in our food systems these days. And we're creating community resilience at the same time. And one of the most important pieces of work is engaging the students, which brings me to the students. And this little picture up here was supposed to be down here. So basically, when you engage students and when you educate them, change will begin to happen. And these kids have taken on the responsibility of pouring milk from a milk machine that's 100% organic and delivering it to the children and being able to explain the why behind the new milk that they're having. In fact, the first time we served organic milk to our children, they had never had milk like that in their lives. And we probably went through 4 times the amount of milk in a week than we ever could have imagined because of the taste. So since milk is such a good place to start, we decided that we would create a piece to educate and really hope that through this education, teachers and students in their classrooms would really better understand the impacts that organic milk has versus conventional, which you've just heard a lot about from Jess. So these are just some ways that we can advocate and affect change in all of our schools, wherever we live, and be really noisy, loud voices in our communities. And I invite you all to be on this journey that we all must be on in our communities, and to also never take no for an answer, and to find allies and advocates where we all live to do things like transition to organic milk and organic produce, because we can. And I would like to say thank you to everybody, and thank you, Jessica, for hosting us all.
Thanks, Judy. That's so inspirational. It's so important to see these examples of how this kind of movement has taken root. So now Megan's going to talk about the policies that need to change to make sure that families can get access to organic regardless of their socioeconomic status. So I'll hand it over to Megan to kind of do a deep dive into policy.
Thanks, Jessica. So as Judy mentioned, these federal nutrition programs are critical. So the federal government spends hundreds of billions of dollars each year to help support feeding low-income people. So there's many different programs. There's SNAP, which is probably the most popular program, also known as food stamps. So that helps low-income folks purchase food at the grocery store. There's the food bank programs. A lot of those are also federally funded. The school lunch programs, so that's national. So it includes breakfast, lunch, and snacks. And then there's the WIC program, which serves low-income pregnant women who are breastfeeding postpartum, and it covers the infants up until age 5. So these are really critical programs, and we have a lot of income inequality in this country. So unfortunately, just to understand the impact of some of these programs, for example, in the WIC program, 47 million infants that are born in this country are under the WIC program. So in some cases, over half of the US population is using some of these programs. So it has a huge impact, the food that they're getting. Traditionally, these programs have been underfunded. So, the weekly allotment for an individual on food stamps was around $35 a week. So imagine going to the grocery store and trying to purchase only $35 worth of food. You're not going to get healthy food with that budget. You're going to get cheap, highly processed food that's not nutritious. So expanding organic and expanding local foods in these programs is critical to helping these vulnerable populations. And so the federal government, again, underfunded. These programs are underfunded, and the cost structures and regulations around purchasing for these programs are also very outdated. And so what we have is a system that really, instead of supporting farmers and local businesses, is really reinforcing corporate consolidation in our agriculture system and propping up large-scale commodity growers. And in some cases, these nutrition programs are actually designed to help stabilize U.S. agricultural markets. So a lot of the commodities that are purchased that go to the food banks were just excess purchases from the government to help stabilize inventory. So, we're not really getting people what they need. The good news is that recently a lot has changed. The pandemic really upended everything, as you know, in our food system, but particularly in how these programs were structured and designed. So USDA all of a sudden had to figure out, how do we get food quickly to people, especially kids, school kids who are no longer in school. So they really had to think outside of the box. The entire worldwide supply chain was disrupted with food. And so they really had to improvise to get food quickly to people. And so that resulted in them issuing waivers on the regulations, whether it came to the cost requirements or other, arcane regulatory requirements that are part of our federal purchasing and procurement system. A lot of those things were waived temporarily to make sure that food was getting to people quickly. And a lot of times they were prioritizing for the first time purchasing of local and regional food. So really bolstering those supply chains. And previously it was really hard, and it still is in a lot of cases, for small businesses and organic farmers to qualify for these programs. So I think the silver lining in all of this is that it demonstrated that you can create and build partnerships with local and organic food companies in a cost-effective way and build a more resilient food supply chain. So if you build it, they will come. People really rose to the occasion. Many organic food companies have donated food to the food banks and school districts in this time, and we're successful in that and want to continue those partnerships. And we really, federally, we need to make sure that organic is not left behind because of cost and a variety of other barriers. So during the pandemic, it's really the large-scale food service providers that serve restaurants, hospitals, militaries, and schools at institutional purchasing. They really took a hard hit because of COVID when these supply chains were disrupted. Organic actually grew during the pandemic because most organic food is not consumed at institutions or outside of the home. Organic food is primarily consumed in the home, and people buy it at the retail level. So in a sense that helped organic kind of weather some of the storm that happened during COVID. But it also means that organic really isn't in those supply chains that service some of these larger institutional partners. So there is a critical opportunity right now to change this. There is a large push at the federal level, for example, to make school meals universally free for all kids, regardless of income. So right now, low-income kids qualify for free school meals, and then up from there, the prices change based on the income level. That can get really burdensome for school administrators when they're trying to figure out how to run these school meal programs. So making school meals free for all kids in the US will really help invest in our children and help stabilize those programs and actually make them successful. So we're seeing a large policy shift there. Recently, just a few weeks ago, USDA announced a change to the Thrifty Food Plan, which determines the budget for food stamps. And they increased the food stamp allotment an average of, I think, $36 per individual. That's huge. That program, that allotment that folks get hasn't been increased in like decades. So this was a big deal that they actually looked at what does a nutritious, healthy diet cost these days, and is the SNAP in the food stamp program actually, are those allotments reflective of that? And obviously they were not. So they increased that funding, so that will help people purchase more healthy foods. We're also seeing a very keen interest from the Biden administration in particular on climate friendly federal procurement. So ensuring that the power of the federal purse, that all those federal contracts that we get and that purchasing that happens, which is hundreds of billions of dollars per year, that we're investing in climate friendly systems, and that relates to agriculture as well. And so we know organic is good for the environment and good for climate. And so we need to see that shift happen in our nutrition programs. And we're also seeing a push from this administration to really crack down on corporate consolidation in agriculture and help support those small and medium-sized farmers remain competitive, and nutrition programs and procurement and purchasing as a way to do that. So the time right now is ripe to make a change. So there are things that you can do today, right now, at this very moment, to help make that change. We have a action alert set up, and you can just quickly, it'll take you 2 minutes to fill this out. You fill in your information, and it'll send a letter to your congressperson as well as your senators to push for more organic food and nutrition programs. So a couple of things that we're asking for in particular and advocating for right now at the federal level are asking Congress to include an organic pilot program in the upcoming Child Nutrition Act reauthorization for school meals. So the Child Nutrition Act is the legislation that authorizes all the school lunch program and WIC as well, and it's up for reauthorization. If Congress does decide to move on that in the near future, it's a real opportunity to make some changes. The act hasn't been updated in over a decade. The 2010 was the last time that the act was authorized. And it was important because it changed some of the nutrition standards for the school meals program under Michelle Obama. That was kind of her initiative when President Obama was the president, and they made a lot of progress in the last Child Nutrition Act. So we need to make more progress in this next reauthorization. You also should encourage USDA to reduce barriers so that states can allow organic food in the WIC program. So all the states individually manage the WIC program. There's a really strict list of what foods can be purchased in that program because it's geared towards pregnant women and infants. And so it's very restricted. Some states do allow organic food, others don't. And so that leads to a system of inequity. So we really need federal guidance so that states can allow organic food in that program. Right now, we're also encouraging USDA, because they got so much increased funding from Congress and flexibilities because of the pandemic, to purchase more organic food in their nutrition programs. They have the resources to do that now. Now is the time to be asking them to do that as they're designing these new programs to roll out the billions of dollars in pandemic assistance that they were allocated from Congress. And then as we speak, Congress is starting to draft, I'm sure most of you have heard of this, what's being called a budget reconciliation bill. It's the $3.5 trillion that they're trying to pump into the economy. And it touches everything in federal government. And there's quite a bit of money right now that the budget committees are working with as it relates to nutrition, billions of dollars. So we're asking Congress to include at least $100 million, probably more now that I heard from Judy how much it costs just in her community to get that off the ground. But to purchase organic food in that upcoming budget reconciliation bill. make those investments. And then lastly, again, Judy demonstrated this greatly. The best thing that you can do is work in your local community to make a difference. So be that squeaky wheel, fight for kids and fight for those that are vulnerable, to get the food that they need, that's nutritious, that's healthy. They deserve that. They deserve organic. And make sure that your kids are getting organic food when they go to school as well. And parents can make a huge difference in their local communities that way, by asking questions, by working with the local school district and helping make that possible. And Judy's got a great model with Conscious Kitchen to help try and replicate that and make that happen. So I'll end there, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end, but please write to your member of Congress, work with in your local community to make these changes now.
All right, thanks, Megan. So we are going to open it up for questions now. So I'll invite the panelists all back onto the video. We also have some brand representatives from Stonyfield and Organic Valley who can also answer some of your questions too. So Britt Lundgren from Stonyfield will be on video. Josh Fairfield from Organic Valley is there to answer questions in the chat box. So we'll go ahead and open it up, and I already see questions coming through. Hang on. All right, the calculator shows chemical avoidance for milk. Is it the same with other dairy products like cheese or ice cream? Yes. And in fact, when you're looking at this calculator, since it's only calculating based on gallons of milk, if you're looking at things like cheese or ice cream, it's actually going to be higher because it takes more gallons of milk to create 1 gallon of ice cream, or 1 pound of cheese. So yes, when you look at that calculator, we base it off milk, but it applies to everything that's made with milk. So great question. All right, so where can we find research on data on the net carbon reduction of organic dairy systems versus CAFO? This is a great question too, especially because I know that Organic Valley is working on this right now. They have a study that is in the peer review process for publication. So peer review is when it gets reviewed by anonymous scientists who are experts in the field. So Josh, I'll let you put a link in the chat maybe to let people know where they can get more information about this. It's not out yet, but I think that Organic Valley has been releasing some, say, juicy tidbits of information that are good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll jump on camera real quick. We are in the midst of a study that's actually already been conducted. It's going through the peer review process at the moment. The results look really, really good, to the tune of almost half as much carbon impact as conventional dairy. So it's really exciting work. We're hoping in November to get those results. So if you want to follow that, you should follow us on social media at Organic Valley on any social media channel. That said, you should also look for some news around November to see the actual full calculation. But I'll give you a link in the chat in just a second.
Awesome, thanks. All right, another question. When will Wisconsin be RBST free? So recombinant growth hormone with their dairies. I'd like to buy cheese from them, but don't because of this. The easiest way to make sure that there is no growth hormone in your cheese is to choose organic. This is one of the things that I love about organic, is it makes all these decisions so easy. You care about growth hormones, you care about antibiotics, you care about pesticides. All you have to do is choose organic. So you can already buy cheese from Wisconsin as long as you see that USDA organic seal. You can be 100% sure that no recombinant growth hormones are being used. Anybody else have other thoughts about that one? Yeah, it's pretty simple. All right, does Stonyfield also consider grass-fed in addition to organic? So Britt, this one's for you.
Sure. The organic standard requires all cows to be out on pasture for 120 days a year. And we know that the milk that we're getting, whether it's through our direct supply or through the crop cooperative Organic Valley, we know that most of those farmers are greatly exceeding that pasture requirement. So pasture is just a super important part of nutrition for all organic dairy cows. And we do have a grass-fed line of yogurt, so that's available in some stores. If folks are looking for that added benefit from cows being, out on pasture as much as possible, but also not having any grains in their diet. But we know that going 100% grass-fed is not for all farms. It's a tricky transition, and so we try to have the balance between organic and grass-fed.
Great. All right, here's the question that's kind of a fun one. How do you navigate choosing organic on a limited budget? So I can go ahead and start and say that one of the things that I think about, first of all, we've got a bunch of tips for you, but when it comes to buying organic, when it costs more, that's because it costs the farmers more. So the farmers are out there actually putting in a lot more work. They're not using the shortcuts like pesticides, synthetic fertilizer. So it costs more for those organic farmers to make the products, which is why you end up seeing it more expensive in the grocery store. And when I'm in the grocery store, I like to think about it like I'm not just buying food to feed my family, which definitely is still in my head when I am buying food at the grocery store. But I'm also, when I choose organic, I'm actually making a stand for causes I believe in. So things that are really important to me, when I choose organic, I know I'm supporting. I know that I'm supporting pollinator health. I know that I'm supporting climate change mitigation. I know that I'm supporting soil health. So all of these things that I want to be an activist in, but don't have time because I have a full-time job and am raising 2 small children, I can actually still be active in when I'm at the grocery store. I also have a lot of tips for keeping it within my budget because I do have a very strict budget, but I'll give some other people a chance to talk. So if Britt, Judy, Megan, any of you want to take that, I can just add on at the end.
So one of the things that that we recommend, especially to college students, since that's so much of our constituency, is buying bulk. So when you buy bulk, you're doing a few things. One is that you're probably reusing containers, so you're not creating more waste. And the prices are definitely less when you go to the store. The other thing is really kind of getting to know your farmers at the farmers markets. Utilize the farmers markets. Often at the end, if they are left with any goods, the prices will be a little bit less expensive. And, particularly for students, might be more affordable, but really to all of us. I mean, we all live on a budget and food is getting more and more expensive. Pandemics had a lot to do with that as well, and droughts and floods and everything else that we're facing. So there are probably all different kinds of opportunities in your community to start to navigate how you might be able to afford the food that you really want to put in your body.
Judy, I love that you suggested the going to farmers markets at the end of the market, because I used to do that when I was a student. I would literally go, I'd be like, okay, the farmers market goes till 1. I would go at 1:10 and just ask them, do you guys have anything that's gonna rot next week that I can eat now? And they often would. You can also go and ask for kitchen grade things. So I would do that a lot with tomatoes. I'd ask for, their bruised tomatoes, and then I'd make tomato sauce out of it. I don't need my tomatoes to be perfect. Cut out the brown spots. Yep.
So I lived in a mixed income neighborhood in DC. So we have some of the, larger national grocery chains. And one of the things that I do always is just to buy the store brands. A lot of the store brands have their own organic lines, and they're cheaper than buying the name brand products, and they're just as good. And then sometimes if you buy some of the larger national brands like Stonyfield, it can be more cost effective. than purchasing local. So just taking that into account when you're at the grocery store. But the store bought, I feel like, is always an easy one to do, the store brands.
Yeah, another thing, oh, go ahead, Britt.
One last tip that I'll add is just to think about, you don't have to think about converting your entire diet to organic all at once, right? I think there are very few people who do that, but maybe look at the places where the foods that you eat most frequently, or the things that you give to your kids most frequently, like milk or yogurt, where you're consuming it on a daily basis and the impact could add up. I think, looking for things in the freezer section is sometimes a more cost-effective way to get organic produce, and it's frozen when it's really fresh. So it's actually a great way to include organic produce in your diet. Yeah, so I'd suggest that.
Yeah, and it's a really good point that you don't have to have your entire diet organic. I always get comments from stressed out parents, which I totally relate to, where they're like, I don't think I can buy 100% organic for my family. And what's really encouraging is there are studies out there that show that even if you eat some organic, that still has a huge impact on the pesticides that end up in your body or in the body of your children. So there are studies showing that there is still significant decreases in pesticide loads in people's bodies when they choose organic sometimes. So just know that whenever you choose organic, you're having a big impact, and don't stress about trying to get 100% organic diet all the time. Do what you can. You're doing good. I feel like every parent needs to hear that right now. You're doing a good job. I'll give a couple more tips. One of the things I like to do is buy things that are in season that are really cheap. So like asparagus. I love asparagus. It's so expensive most of the year, except during the 1 month of asparagus season when it seems like stores are almost giving away asparagus. So I buy stuff when it's on sale, when it's in season, freeze it or make soups with it. So my husband is this big soup maker. He makes these huge batches of soups, freezes them in little glass pint jars. And then when we go to work, we just grab a jar and it thaws while we're at work and it's ready to eat by the time lunch rolls around. So there's a lot of stuff you can do. Another thing that I do, it's kind of the same way that organic growers have more planning to do when they're planting, harvesting. It's a little bit more work to grow organic. Some organic farmers might say a lot more work. It's kind of the same when it comes to being an organic consumer. It's a little bit more work. It takes a little bit more planning for me to eat organic within my budget. So I shop around at different stores. I see what's on sale. When it's on sale, buy more of it when it's on sale and kind of store it. I have a pretty small house, so sometimes that's not feasible, but I do what I can. And I know that the Organic Trade Association actually has this webpage with a bunch of tips for how to buy organic in a budget. So Libby, if you don't mind popping that up too, that might be of interest to people. You guys can kind of check out what tips they came up with. All right, so one last question. I know we're almost out of time, but other than carbon capture, what other regenerative measures can organic dairy speak to? So Britt, I know you work a lot on this, Josh too, so if you guys have anything to add to that.
One of the things that I love about visiting organic dairy farms is just witnessing the amount of biodiversity that's happening on those farms. And I think it's a real testament to the way that organic farms support the ecosystem around them and are in harmony with that ecosystem around them. And measuring biodiversity is a little tricky. We're getting better at it. There's some really cool research going on with using audio recordings in the field to capture birdsong and insect noise, and it tells you, the level of biodiversity you have. But I think, it's something that you can witness yourself just by visiting an organic dairy and seeing how much life there is.
Yeah, that's really well said, Britt. There was a study from I think Washington University, we could find a link to that later, that said organic farms have approximately 30% more biodiversity when they're surrounded by conventional farms. So we see organic farms as kind of a refuge for life. And you see that just anecdotally on farm, but like Britt said, there are really innovative measures setting up to how to record biodiversity. I'm having a meeting tomorrow morning with someone from a company who's tracking through audio, and it's really innovative research to show biodiversity. But then the other big part of regeneration, and especially organic dairy, is pasture management and pasture rotation. So to regenerate the climate, we have to sequester carbon, and one of the best ways to do that is through pasture and through natural management. I mean, we had giant megafauna throughout North America grazing on pastures for millennia, and then that stopped because of some human activity, but we can also bring them back because of some human activity, and that's organic farming. So there's some really great work being done at the Grasslands 2.0 project at University of Wisconsin-Madison. They're doing some great work trying to teach farmers how to advance grass management. And the great thing about organic is it requires that cows are out on pasture. It's one of the only certifications that does. And as Britt and Jessica, I think, mentioned before, most of the dairy we get goes way above the organic requirements, which is, I think, 120 days. You guys can correct me on that. But our average, we're finding up to 190 at Organic Valley, possibly around 200, depending on how the data comes back about next month. But there's so many great regenerative practices. Choosing organic dairy is a great way to support that.
All right, and we are out of time, unfortunately. I'm sorry to everyone if we didn't get to your questions. We'll be reaching out individually to answer more questions. If you have others, feel free to reach out to me. But thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to hand it back to Libby. I think she's just got a couple wrap-up notes for everyone, but thanks to our panelists. This was a really fun webinar.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jessica. And I will echo thanks to Judy and to Jessica and Megan for your insightful presentations, and again to Britt and Josh for joining us today. And having, I think, a really great Q&A as well. On behalf of the staff and members of the Organic Trade Association, we really greatly appreciate your time and attendance and commitment to organic. As a reminder, a link to view the recording from today's webinar, as well as access to the full slides, will be sent out in the next 2 business days. On behalf of the Organic Center and the Organic Trade Association, we hope to have you join us for future educational opportunities. And please, everyone, have a wonderful and safe day. Thanks.